Scott here from SGA for the Command Tip of the Week. Coming to you today from in front of the emergency room. My plan is to discuss risk assessment versus risk analysis as it relates to a secondary size-up of an incident and why this information is so important. As you may have noticed, the Command Tip of the Week has been on hiatus for a couple of months. The reason for this unfortunate hiatus was my life-threatening fall. My fall caused several fractures to my humerus and my hip. I was very lucky though. I didn't sustain any head or spinal injuries. We are all familiar with those incidents where a patient meets trauma criteria by falling over 12 feet and has received fatal injuries. So I consider myself very lucky. I want to be very clear. This incident was entirely self-inflicted. These injuries were caused by my decision-making process. I did a really good risk assessment, but I ignored my risk analysis. I believe this is something that we do on the fire ground every day. So here's my story. My wife and I were traveling in our motorhome from Las Vegas towards Carson City, Nevada. If you are familiar with this area at all, you know that we were in the middle of nowhere. On this day, the winds were blowing at about 50 miles an hour with gusts up to 70. The slide out on our motorhome has a topper awning, which is held in place on a spring-loaded drum. The drum is attached on one end to the slide out and on the other end to the motorhome with a C-track. The force of the wind began to overcome the spring tension on the motorhome, causing the drum to rotate and unroll the awning. This resulted in the awning flapping in the wind and tearing loose from the motorhome. Now, our first attempt to correct the problem was to extend the slide out and then retract it in an attempt to get the awning to return to its normal position. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful with this technique. So my next bright idea was to remove the topper awning and reinstall it when we reached the calmer weather. I did my risk assessment. The risk assessment identified that there were 50-mile-an-hour winds with gusts to 70. It also identified that the ladder footing was less than optimal and that we did not have enough manpower to remove the awning and foot the ladder at the same time. Any one of these conditions should have caused me to consider a different option other than removing the awning. In hindsight, those options were, first, sitting in this location and allowing the wind and the weather to pass. Second option was retracting the slide out, driving to a location that had better footing for the ladder. And our third option was to request additional resources to safely foot the ladder and assist in removing the awning. This is where my analysis failed. Because I had an overinflated opinion of my abilities, I disregarded all other options. This analysis should have prevented me from taking these actions and these unacceptable risks, knowing that the consequences of these actions could be severe. This overinflated opinion of my abilities was developed by being accidentally successful over a 30-year career on ladders and taking unacceptable risks with no negative consequences. This thought process put me on the top of a ladder with my feet above the roof level of the motorhome. A gust of wind came up and umbrellaed the awning, which hit the top of the ladder and knocked it out from underneath me. I learned at that moment I'm pretty good at flying, but I need some really definite work on my landings. I landed flat on my back. Another claim of cat-like reflexes exposed and disproved. As a result of my poor decision making, I have learned some valuable lessons, and I hope you will use my experiences for your benefit on the fire ground. The first lesson I learned was realistic risk assessment is required. Identifying all risks associated with any given task is invaluable. The second lesson learned is that action is not always required, but a risk analysis is. If the risks associated with any tasks are too great, then your action is not required. You can decide to do nothing until the conditions change. And the third lesson I learned is on a personal note, is that I am not a very good patient. Being in constant pain, unable to walk without a cane, and being unable to use one arm is very frustrating. For the past 3 months, I have been unable to dress myself, needed help bathing, and got excited when I could put toothpaste on my own toothbrush. So I am publicly need to thank my wife for being so patient and understandable. She only gets frustrated with me a couple of times a day, and I believe that had the tables been turned, I would have been frustrated and short with her constantly. In our next tip of the week, we're going to discuss normalization of deviance and why that pushed me into taking action. This normalization occurs far too often and causes all of us to take inappropriate actions. Hopefully your normalization of deviance is not as detrimental to your life as it has been to mine. Hopefully you can learn from my mistakes and misfortune. Stay tuned for more tips on secondary size-ups and risk assessment in the upcoming weeks. We recommend you use this information and include it in your secondary size-up. Be sure to practice the perishable skill of size-ups and making good decisions, and visit our website at www.scottgoodwinassociates.com for the tools necessary to help you improve your skill of predicting fire behavior, establishing command, and practicing communication. As always, train like your life depends on it, because it does, and be safe out there.